I got a couple goals today. So I know you said it, I've been working in the industry for a while. I did come up on the GRC track. I've done a little bit of blue, red, academically like everybody else here. But I really have done a lot in GRC. And part of my goal of giving this talk today is to kind of demystify it and make GRC cool-ish. Okay, so I know red's wicked cool, lots of sizzle, blue's becoming even more mainstream and super cool, and GRC is just kind of like nerds with clipboards. But there's a lot going on in the GRC space, and what I want to do with this talk is really explore that, share it with you, and go from there. Now, before I go any further, I'm super excited about Midjourney. All of the slides that you'll see in this deck, much like this one, are created with Midjourney. Midjourney is like one of these DALL-E 2 type computer AI generated. So for all the slides, you'll see, every slide's going to look similar to this with a word and then some Midjourney generated photo where the word is part of the input into Midjourney, right? So this one was expectations tarot card technology. This is what it generated. So I just think it's really cool and visually interesting. So that's what we're doing there. So if you're interested in Midjourney, it's free, So anyways, okay. So let me lay out some expectations on what you can get from this talk. 3 things that you should be able to take away. And, basically as I'm walking through this, you can identify and be like, yeah, absolutely. So the first one is how GRC fits into an overall information security program. You might have some assumptions on what that is. You may work in an organization that doesn't have a formal program. Maybe it's just 2 or 3 people, or you're a network engineer who is matrixed with information security responsibilities because you're the one who knows tech stuff. But in a program that you can either build out or mature into, GRC has a very specific function, a very specific business value, and that's one thing that you'll get out of this talk. Another thing that you're going to get out of this talk, and this one I'm really excited about, is how SecOps, right? So if you're a blue teamer, you're in the SIM all the time, and you're just back up, GRC person. I want you to be able to take away from this ways that the SecOps people, the blue team people, can actually leverage the GRC people to help enable their mission. There is collaboration opportunities, there is integrations. It's not just oh my God, stop it with this compliance stuff, or I'm not filling your questionnaire out. Right? There's ways for SecOps to get GRC, to get them money, to fund their initiatives and their programs. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. And then finally, the crux of the talk, I'm going to go into each element of the GRC analyst and what that specific role is within the organization. And I'm going to tell you the pros and the cons of each of those. So, I've done GRC long enough that you can kind of say there's 5 buckets, right? 5 buckets of role or function that you do. We'll talk about it and, basically tell you why you like it or why it sucks and how you can leverage it. So very first one, just to level set what GRC is, because, I make some assumptions. GRC stands for governance, risk, and compliance, and it's basically a bucket of, cyber slop that just gets pushed in and shoved over to these people. But the real value of GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance, is to interface with the business on all things information security. So when, again, Alyssa's talk yesterday kind of elaborated this, the business, the CFO, the CEO, they're in it to make money, right? Cash money. That's why they're in business. They're not in business for 6 0 days and research. So when there is problems or there is, a question from an investor about what are we doing about ransomware? Did you hear about this Colonial Pipeline thing? The CEO needs to turn to someone and say, hey, I don't speak this. Are we good? That's what GRC is. They literally are the interface. And think about it, blue teamers, you're not, you don't want to talk to Carl in accounting, right? You want, unless you're calling them to tell them to not click on the fish or you're going to re-image their machine because they did click on the fish. This is what GRC does. Also, GRC interfaces with the business in the fact of getting money, communicating effectively on what priorities should be in this type of thing. Also, obviously, GRC is responsible for all the compliance stuff, all the risk stuff. So the way that I like to think about it is if you think about the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is basically 5 stages, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. to me, and I'd love to argue with someone about this or have a spirited conversation, like between protect and detect is like where boom happens, right? So left of boom, which would be detect, respond, recover, that's SecOps job, right? You guys are dealing with fires, putting them out, getting the business back in sorts. Identify and protect, that's really where GRC lives, because we're the ones who are trying to help understand what's going on, set priorities, set standards. We don't have infinite money. We barely have enough money to get the things that we need funded in the first place. So we need to be able to make that compelling case. So this is what GRC is at the top level. So now let's start digging in underneath the hood. So compliance. I love how the AI engine thought that compliance was like oversight, like 1984 Orwellian monitoring, but compliance is probably I would argue, like the most boring, right, frankly. The most boring part of GRC, it's the part of GRC that is like sand in your shorts, right? Like if you've been to the beach and gotten sand in there, like it's very like irritating and annoying. It typically doesn't move your mission forward at all because you're asking for things that may not actually reduce risk in any way, but because of regulatory bodies or because of some external force requiring you to do something, like cyber insurance, you know, the insurance companies are requiring you to do certain things. Maybe it doesn't make sense for your organization, but you're still asking for it. Or worse, you actually don't have the experience and context to know that asking for, like, I don't know, a clean desk policy of an engineer who's working at a steel press on a factory floor. Like, you don't need a clean desk policy there. They're not even logging into a computer, but you know, compliance says every end user needs to do it. So this is typically a pain point and a friction point for GRC when they're trying to enamor themselves with the business and with the other parts of information security. But it is incredibly important because if you are not compliant with standards, with regulatory bodies, like you can suffer real things. And getting back to the revenue generation piece of the business, if you are, like, let's say not PCI compliant, payment card industry, and you have some like egregious breach or whatever, it's possible, doesn't happen often, but it's possible that the credit card companies could say, you know what, you're not going to be able to take Visa and MasterCard anymore, which would be devastating for a business that's like, I don't know, an online business maybe, or, you know, a food truck that's doing whatever, right? Like they probably use Square, but you get my point, right? You could seriously screw up the revenue. Another thing that is terrible, but it's really worth pointing out, especially if you're new to the industry and you're like, oh, this GRC thing seems like an easy onboard, which it is, by the way, because it's probably the least technical of all of the disciplines within our practice. There is like this movement, and anyone in this room who has dealt with this is definitely gonna like wince in pain because they felt it themselves. There's this movement over the like last 3 or 4 years of it falls under third-party risk management, but it's basically compliance. You're going to do business with some organization, right? But before they say, let's do business, or you're going to get an insurance policy, but before the insurance providers write you a policy, they send you a questionnaire, right? This questionnaire is so annoying, right? It could be 19 questions. It could be 600 questions. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no standard to the industry. And like, let's be honest, you fill it out, like the person who receives it, they're not doing any type of like objective analysis over like, oh, like they're using multi-factor, but you know, they don't do phishing training. So someone could do like MFA fatigue attack. Like no one's doing that. They like literally, they're like, oh, this weighs enough, like pass, you know, like, so, but that's incredibly exhausting for people to fill out these forms over and over and over again. And unfortunately, it typically falls to like the junior analyst, or if you're not fortunate enough to have a large enough team to handle that, it falls on someone, because the business wants to do business with some entity, and that entity will not move forward unless you fill out this thing. So that's not technically compliance with respect to regulatory requirements, but in my opinion, it falls under it because you have to comply with this request. All right, now let's get into like a little bit more funner stuff. I wanted to start with compliance and just kind of throw that under the rug. So this is Audit, right? By the way, the inputs to this was like Audit Mech Warrior business guy, I think it was. And this is what it came up with. I started in Audit a million years ago. I will tell you this. I should have said this a minute ago. Compliance is typically like an in-house function, right? Compliance is an in-house function for your business. Audit is typically an outsourced function. Now, you can have internal audit, but it's typically not an information security capability. Typically, audit is an independent third-party entity coming in to have an independent assessment of your security, of your compliance, of your whatever. The reason that audit is a good onboarding for many people is for two reasons. One, there's audit has to happen for compliance standards. So you'll see a ton of FISMA auditor job openings, or CMMC is coming, or it was coming and then it stopped, but it'll be coming at some point. HIPAA auditors, right? PCI, which is its own thing, but there's audit capabilities. Audit has to happen. Organizations are required to have audit completed, so that work is going to happen. So the reason I put this up, not only is it a requirement or a key capability of a GRC function, it is an awesome onboarding ramp, because if you have, let's say you just have limited technical acumen, or you're new to the industry or whatever, the cool thing with audit is they give you what you should be looking at and what you need to ask and everything. And really the work of audit is the grind. It's the grunt work of going, setting up the meetings, interviewing the sysadmins and the HR and the legal counsel and all the people, asking them what they're doing, collecting all that research, or not research, but those findings, and then putting in, are you satisfying the requirement? Are you not satisfying the requirement? Writing the audit report. This is what a day in the life of an auditor is, right? It's an Excel spreadsheet, it's scheduling meetings, it's asking the same questions over and over to different stakeholders, and just piling the results. Audit is, it's grunt, it's grind, but it does have its purpose. And the reason that I think audit is a great, awesome starting point is because audit naturally feeds into risk. And this is really what I would consider the value add that GRC can have for an organization at its maximum. So if you think about audit for a second, right? Okay, so we're going to audit your organization for your access controls or for whatever, right? Okay, we looked at it. You've got these controls in place. I'm going to give you partial credit for some of these controls because it's terrible, but at least you got something, you're thinking about it. And these controls, you have nothing in place. And as an auditor, you would just issue a statement you're compliant, you're not compliant, 90-day to remediate, whatever. There isn't a lot, with all due respect, there isn't a lot of knowledge work being done. You have to do the analysis if it's in place or not, but you're not really doing the work of improving the situation. You're just stating the situation. With risk, this is like audit plus plus, right? So you take the raw results of the audit, not in place, whatever, and then you start looking at it from basically a cybersecurity and an information security risk to the business, right? Okay, you have, I don't know, let's say you have 8-character password lengths as a requirement, right? But maybe the requirement for whatever is 12 characters. Well, that's clearly not okay. But if you look at it from a risk perspective, you might say, okay, yeah, you do 8 characters and that's not cool, but you have 3-factor authentication, right? You have to do an MFA and you have to do a biometric and you've got this crap password. But the risk of it being exploited fully and realized that you get unauthorized access to the system is way lower than if, just saying 8-character password. So there's no context to it. And this is the real work of risk analysis. It's basically taking that thing, right? So we've got our finding, it's in place, it's not in place, status, and then one more thing of kind of context of what is the threat to the organization? What threats are there? A mom and pop ice cream shop has probably less threat landscape, if you will, than Lockheed Martin, right? Just as 2 contrasting examples to make the point. Also, with risk, you can look at it and say, okay, this thing is vulnerable to what would be something that Felina, okay? We didn't fix it. It's vulnerable to Felina, but it's a lab workstation that's they just use R&D just uses for screwing around. It's not even connected to any type of network or anything like that. Totally acceptable risk. But if you're just looking at it from an audit perspective, it's oh, we got a finding here, right? And that's part of the problem with this. But with a day in the life of a risk analyst, you move this forward to say, okay, now we've done all of our risk analysis, and then you prioritize it, okay? we've got gaping holes on, usually it's like identify and protect is like okay. That's where a lot of people focus their energy because it's easy to buy appliances, it's easy to configure things. The detect, respond, and recover is typically where you see major gaps, and in my experience where the risk priority is typically found as the highest priority right off the rip, right? You got all these cool tools, but you're not actually logging anything, right? Maybe you bought a SIM, but nothing's pumping into it. You haven't done any like, correlation or detection engineering or anything. You just have a bunch of logs coming in, and audit checks the box that, yeah, you're meeting requirements, but with the risk, you might say, you guys have no clue if you're going to get, like, you could be hit right now, you have no idea, or you don't have EDR on your endpoints or something like that. So with risk, and this is the part where it kind of plays into SecOps, if you will, with risk, you can say, okay, here are all the things. Now, talking to the SecOps people, what are you guys, or what are you people seeing, right? What are you seeing? Like, oh, we see a lot of people falling for this, or we see a lot of initial compromise, like phishing, right? Let's all agree. Phishing is like a primary initial attack vector, right? Well, if you don't have some type of decent email gateway, which many of us do at this point, but if you don't have that, that's a huge, huge gap. And by getting SecOps actual intel to say, like, listen, most of the incidents that happen at our organization are coming through email, right? Which wouldn't be uncommon. You could say, okay, well, we need to prioritize email gateway. This is where you start to collaborate. Because again, GRC is the one who's going to be making the case to the CIO, the CFO, that we need money for budget, and it's going to cost X, Y, and Z to fund an email gateway. But without the context of SecOps, right, you might say, I think, well, DLP would be such a terrible option, but just to use a harebrained example, right? Data loss prevention, which I think is a impractical control to implement, like you might prioritize that because you heard about data exfiltration from insider threats, right? We see like Rivian taking Tesla's battery technology, right? So maybe you prioritize that because you're a manufacturing company with IP. But in reality, most of your actual incidents are coming from phishing. So this is how risk can partner with, or not risk, but GRC can partner with SecOps and really get some value. Okay, so if compliance was bad, governance is pretty bad, okay? So governance often gets kind of a bad rap, okay? Because it's mostly documentation. This is where your policies, your procedures, your standards get defined. There's businesses that literally sell like FISMA compliance in a box, right? Where you just like, for $400, you can buy a bunch of static policies that map to every control family that you're required to meet. And for $400 and 10 minutes of your time, your -1 controls in FISMA are compliant. But the thing is, if you put policies in your organization that don't actually make any sense or don't do anything for your organization, no one's going to follow them. So then you just have it for checkbox compliance. And I mean, at that point, like what I'm hearing from the business at that point is like, we don't really care about security because it's not really important. Now, what I would say is there is this tension, if you will, between the need to be compliant with certain standards and the need to have actually like practical policy, right? So an example would be like having like a contingency planning policy, right? You're supposed to have one. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. But in reality, it might be more practical to have a policy about how just how backups are going to be handled. And here's another thing that GRC does, talking to the business, and I count IT as the business. I'm firmly in the camp, and again, I'd have a spirited discussion with anyone. I'm firmly in the camp that InfoSec and IT are two different functions that rely on each other. They both have tech interfaces, but they are two separate functions. InfoSec needs to talk to IT about what is actually happening, what can be done, what is practical, and then making policies that both shape best behavior, good cyber hygiene for the organization, as well as enabling it. Because if you implement policies that don't enable the organization to do something, they're either going to circumvent the policy, which, what's the point? Especially if it's toothless and you're not going to enforce any type of punishment, or you're going to hinder the business, which isn't going to happen all that often. And I'll give you a good example of how a day in the life could look for an analyst dealing with this thing, right? So you're doing your audit function, right? Which, by the way, isn't a day, right? When you do an audit, it's typically a 3-month project if it's any decent size audit. you do the audit and you come up on the research and development engineers, right? The people who are inventing cool stuff at your business, or like, skunk working stuff. And this happens all the time. Really, really smart people, really, really into their work, and they want to work on the weekends, or they set up some type of ML AI thing to grind, and it's going to take 48 hours to grind through. So they leave it and go home, have a cookout, some beers, right? Wake up on Saturday. They don't want to drive back into the office. So they remote in. No big deal. I'm a wicked smart IT guy. I'll just install a remote desktop solution that I know about, right? I'm wicked good at securing things too. So I know it's secure. I'll set it up. And now I just log in and I work. This insider isn't necessarily malicious. They're not looking to be an insider threat. They're actually trying to go above and beyond. But because of that, they've introduced a potential attack surface, right? This exposed remote desktop connection, whether it's VNC or RDP or whatever. Now, with policies and procedures, you might have a policy that says no remote access is allowed. Well, now you just hindered this guy who wants to be an overachiever from being able to do their job. The opportunity here is to come up with a policy of only authorized remote access solutions are approved, and then having a standard of what those remote access solutions are. And oh, by the way, those aren't free typically, so you need to actually get some budget to put those in place. And now you've just enabled all of R&D, because now you've published like a solution to their problem that they can use if they want to work, from home or whatever, or on the weekends. And oh, by the way, IT knows about it, so they can properly secure it. Instead, like, all the love and respect in the world to Carl in research and engineering, but like IT's job is to set up and configure and manage IT assets. InfoSec's job is to secure those assets. Carl's job is to come up with really cool, innovative stuff, not to set up remote access points into our internal network. You see what I'm saying? So this is an opportunity to collaborate with the IT counterparts of the InfoSec community to have policy that's actually makes a difference and is enabling risk reduction to the organization while enabling the business, right? You're not going to buy that policy in a box, right? For $400, you're not going to get that policy. It's not tailored for your organization. And by the way, this is why developing policy is actually a job instead of some Googling, Google foo of like InfoSec policy file type PDF and then like printing it out and being like, done for the day. Like, it's actually work. And don't even get me started on procedures, because here's a gross secret that everybody should know about if you don't know. And if you do know, like, spoiler alert, like, I'm going to tell it to everybody else, right? Like, procedures are cool, but they're like out of date instantly, and no one goes back and updates them, right? So if you're going to document procedure on how to do something, it's a good idea, because like, Matt right here is our business continuity expert. He's been with the business for 25 years. He just like shoves junior analysts out of the way, like, move. Like, I'm going to do this because I'm much faster at it. Well, the thing is, like, he's on a bus, or he hits the lottery, he goes to Cancun, or he dies, or whatever. Like, those procedures aren't documented, and if they were documented in like 2020 when an audit came through and said you need to document your processes, and they're not kept up to date. So it is a real challenge to keep procedures at a level that are somewhat useful and not instantly antiquated. So that's a spoiler alert of some of the downsides of dealing with governance, right? How am I doing on time here? Yeah. One other thing with governance that's worth mentioning is that a day in the life of a GRC analyst is a vigilant requirement, or a vigilant battle to convince the business and the executives to not take cybersecurity seriously, but be mindful of it, right? The tone at the top. Some of you may have worked at organizations. I can think of a car hosting or car Uber, whatever. I don't know a generic way to explain Uber, but like an organization where the top is like InfoSec, so that tone trickles. That's not a word. There's a word I'm trying to think of. Trickles down? Yeah, trickles down. Thank you. Trickolates. I'm going to have to Google that. So trickles down to the organization and determines what acceptable behavior is, right? Like, if you've ever worked in an organization where it's like freestyling all over the place, then everybody's loose, and you get these like remote access things, or people printing stuff out, or whatever, like just bad cyber hygiene practices, because there's no tone at the top. this is really what governance is as far as information security at an organization being effective. And, you know, we use security awareness, which I'm going to spend a few minutes to get into in a minute here, to help educate and modify the behavior of all users, including executives. But governance is a kind of a tough one. It's not a quick fix, right? Like with audit, it's like, oh, this is going to take 90 days. I'll start here. I'll end here. We're good to go. With governance, it's much more of a meta. It's much more of a vibe. It's much more of a tone of the organization. And it's a much tougher nut to crack. And, you know, just like manning the wall day in and day out as a blue teamer and making sure that you protect it, converting the behavior and setting the tone at the top into a way that's actually pro-cyber is a vigilant battle as well. Now, security awareness. I am like a wicked advocate, super champion of security awareness. And I have what I think is an innovative way to approach it. Certainly better than like the way the DoD does it. And certainly a bit more modern than what it was 10, 15 years ago. So security awareness, at the end of the day, right, it has a cool name and we're all trying to be on the same page and everybody's like kumbaya. But really, security awareness, my job with security awareness is to modify end user behavior, right? It's not to like brainwash them and have them like, you know, I don't know what brainwash people do, but not have them do brainwash stuff, right? It's to educate them so they make good decisions. And one of the things that I have found in my experience is that I would say like 90% of our end users, right? There's always the insider threat, but like 90% of end users want to do the right thing, right? They want to do the right thing. They also want to just do their job and not be bothered with information security and MFAs and extra clicks and all that. But putting that aside, most people want to do the right thing by the organization. In the absence of information, they will choose the right thing based on the information they have. Like Carl setting up that remote desktop thing. He didn't know any different. So he's like, all right, like I want to work. I'm you know, tech savvy. I know how I can set it up. I'll set it up and off I go. Well, by enabling them with education, with information, and allowing them to know how terrible a decision that is, you allow them to make the decisions. You modify their behavior. And again, it's not, you know, psyops like, you know, Operation, oh man, there was like Ultraman or whatever, Ultra, you know that, what was that? There was like a DoD program in the 60s where they used an LSD to like make like super assassins, whatever. Yeah, oh yeah, MK Ultra, thank you, yes. So anyways, we're not doing MK Ultra stuff where we're like putting Manchurian candidates into finance and accounting and then we can just like activate them. Like, we're just trying to modify their behavior. Now, here's two things about security awareness. Now, day in the life, right? So we'll talk about what the day in the life is. But what I want to impart upon you is how to implement this and execute this in a good way. So what might a GRC analyst do? Well, one of the things that is critically important to everybody in our industry, but especially these GRC people, is staying informed on what is current right now, right? You call it threat intelligence if you will. I'm not talking TTPs and IOCs coming in and you're just like yelling IP addresses at like Todd in, you know, managed services, right? Like, or not managed services, Todd in help desk, right? It is more about like, oh, the IRS just saw an uptick in smishing attacks last week, right? Or, you know, Colonial Pipeline was big news, right? So MFA or whatever. Australia, they just had two major telecoms in the country of Australia. The two largest telecoms had breaches like 1 week apart. So basically every Australian had their data leaked last week, okay? So staying informed on that can enable you, A, to keep mindset of what is actually happening right now, because we're always one step behind the threat actors, right? They're always adapting to the defenses we're putting in place. So we have to stay current on what they're doing. Now, what does that mean to Alice, right, in sales? Like, she's like, what are you talking about, like lapsus? Like, that, what does that mean? So what you can do is, on a regular basis, meaning weekly in my case, right? So the concept of the annual, like, security awareness training where you just click through a PowerPoint and then hit the button at the end and go back to your job, that doesn't do anything except annoy people, right? It annoys me, and I love cybersecurity, okay? So the way to do it is to regularly send information. So GRC Analyst comes in on Monday, right? Looks at the news. Hey, this is really interesting. The IRS smishing thing came up, okay? Hey, this is really interesting. What an opportunity. Craft a quick email, right? Hey, what's up, end user community, right? Or like whatever, do it in your own voice, right? Hey, what's up, end user community? Wanted to let you know about this, right? You don't have to explain malware. You don't have to explain threat actors. You don't have to explain intent. All you have to do is say, the IRS is saying that you could get a text message saying it's from the IRS. It's fraudulent. Don't click on it. They don't need to understand C2 infrastructure and watering hole attacks and all that crap. Just be mindful of this. And oh, by the way, I love this technique when it's enableable. Be sure to tell your friends and loved ones, right? Who doesn't want, like my Aunt Kathy, okay, like love her to death. When I talk to her on FaceTime, I look at the ceiling, you know what I'm saying? So like, love her to death, tech isn't like her strong suit. But if I tell her, hey, Aunt Kathy, like if you get a text message from the IRS, it's bullcrap, okay? That's all she needs to know. But me saying it's fine, your Aunt Kathy or Bob who works in engineering, him telling his Aunt Kathy, he will because they care about their friends and loved ones. They may not care about information security, but they care about protecting the people they care about, right? So by sharing that, by making it very easy to share, they will share it. You've done two things with this. One, you've expanded like some cyber resiliency, some cyber risk reduction for your organization, and done a good thing by reducing risk for, you know, helpless victims, frankly, who don't know that they're being attacked this way. Secondly, you're actually enabling security champions within your organization because you've given them something that they've been able to turn around and contribute to someone else. They've given value to someone else, which is fantastic because now they are kind of part of the solution. You do this enough times, you do two things. One, they start thinking like kind of like, oh, this is another one of those security things, right? That I can share. This is cool. I'm the person who knows about this. Secondly, if you do it with some level of frequency, which I strongly encourage, I would do this no less than twice a month, okay? When you do it with some level of frequency, you begin to build rapport and a relationship with the end user community, right? It is, I can't tell you how many times I've had a sales guy call me or had, even an IT person, frankly, call me and be like, hey, Jerry, like, something weird's happening, like, I don't know what it is. But like, if I didn't have that relationship with them, I don't know if they would call me because A, they might be embarrassed, B, they might not want to admit, it could be nothing, it could be something, I don't want to bother them, I don't want to bring the attention onto me, like negative, like maybe I did something wrong and I'm going to get in trouble. But by breaking down those barriers, this GRC analyst, through their day-to-day activity of doing this outbound communication and awareness, is building that relationship and allowing anyone in the organization to be a champion and to actually want to reach out to you, frankly, right? So again, security awareness, I harp on it so hard because I think it's so critically important. Also, just pro tip, two sentences max, guys. Like the poster in the elevator, I don't think it's going to work. Maybe, you know, a text message could work. Like, I find visual communication that's very easy to visually digest is the best action. If you send someone a word wall, right? Like, if, by the way, like, we're in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? So you could go to CISA or NIST and you could right click and copy paste the brick of bullets and you could stick it in an email, but it's going to go the same place that like your company's new like eco-green policy is going to go, right into the trash, right? Because you don't care. Like, I'm there to work and whatever, but like if you send me something short, you'll consume it. Even if you're not interested, like you're like, oh, what is this? Like 8 seconds, like, blah, you read it, cool, you're hooked, right? So security, like, I'm a super security awareness champion, frankly. Okay, now this one didn't have an input. I just put, this was ransomware in the style of Picasso. So this is what it looks like. So, okay. What I've covered today is really the main core competencies of a GRC analyst, right? They do audit. Audit leads into risk. Risk to me is arguably the most important transactional tactical skill of GRC. They do governance, which is paperwork, and which governance kind of ties to compliance because you're typically writing it retroactively to comply with some standard that you need to comply with. But and then security awareness, obviously that's for everybody. Like that's the TLDR to take away from this. That's for everyone, okay? All these pieces stack up together and allow the business to be able to interface with information security in a meaningful way that's open communication. Another thing, guys, like we've abandoned we're the office of no, right? That kind of went away in like the mid-2000s. And now we're like the office of like, enablement or like, let's talk about it, right? But at the end of the day, we're trying to help the business. Again, at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do is help the business. I'm trying to think if there's any other like really key things. The threat intelligence one, okay, so one final thing. As I mentioned, the threat intel is wildly important for security awareness inputs, right? Because, by the way, another thing with that is it's super current, right? So it's not uncommon to message out to your community something on Monday, and on Wednesday, it's on the 5 o'clock news. Because we're usually ahead of these things because the mainstream news is frankly not on top of information security type stuff. So when they get that aha moment of like, oh, I already knew about that, it gives them a little bit of an insider vibe, which is absolutely huge. The same can go with SecOps, okay? So this is the final thing that I wish you could, you take with you. The SecOps people are manning the wall. They see the arrows coming in. They see the assassins trying to sneak through the gate that is like, water goes through and it goes down, like Game of Thrones style, you know what I'm talking about? Whatever they call that thing, okay? They see all these things. The GRC person, we're wearing clean clothes, sitting with a clipboard in a non-discrete, sterile conference room, asking questions, right? I mean, or we're working in an Excel spreadsheet. Like there's no dark mode of Excel, right? There's nothing cool going on in Excel, guys, okay? But we get the threat intel coming from news media, but what's really valuable is the SecOps people talking to us and saying, hey, like we're seeing this, or we're hearing this, or on the dark web this, whatever it is. Again, you can't take like Lapsus has broken into these people and they're posting on their Telegram and shaming and stuff like that. You can't take that and really operationalize it to your end users. But you can take that information and say, okay, let's say we work in manufacturing. We're seeing an uptick in ransomware activity in manufacturing. We're also seeing a pivot from, and this is true, we're seeing a pivot from ransomware encryption, data exfil, to just data exfil wipe. I don't know why. I think it might be easier for the threat actors to wipe than it is to encrypt since they're not getting paid for the decryption keys anymore. But we're seeing this development in the space, frankly. So what do we need to do that? Are we protected? Now, the CISO or the GRC side of the house can have the conversation with SecOps at the technical level of technology and cybersecurity and say, hey, listen, how are we handling this? What's our backup situation look like? How quickly can we recover, honestly? Like, are we talking 4 hours? Are we talking 12 hours? 36 hours? Well, we're kind of a hot mess. We're not really sure. Okay, so maybe we need a tabletop. But the thing is, you can take this information, digest it, massage it, put it in a pretty pie chart or whatever you're going to do, and then bring it to the business side, the executive side, the board side, whatever structure you have on your side to get money, and say, hey, listen, we're looking at this. Our information security program is at this level, right? Like whatever this level is, level 2, level 10, whatever. And we need to be up at like level 15 or level 30 or whatever it is. And our key pain points, like the red flashing bulb, is our inability to recover from ransomware in a timely manner. Now, you're never going to get recovery time objectives from executives. Like they don't wrap their head around telling you how long they can be down. But you can assume like 3-4 days is probably not a good option. So if you can't recover from that, you can use this information from the SecOps crew and say, hey, listen, I'm gonna take this information, prioritize this budget request, and I'll be able to communicate in a way, like basically we're translators, right? The SecOps people don't want to talk to the business side because they don't want to deal with like not talking cool. And the GRC side is that translator of like, okay, like this is really cool, but I'm gonna make it into like business speak or at a 6th grade level with 2 bullets and really kind of like deliver to it. And that's no disrespect to that's no disrespect to executives being at a 6th grade level. That's just makes it easy to digest. All right. So, okay, so that's the talk. Really quick, if you don't know, like Simply Cyber is a community that I run. And I talk about stuff like this all the time over there. So if you're interested and you want to connect with me, this Linktree link is how you can get to like my LinkedIn and my email and all of my socials and stuff like that. So if you want to continue a conversation or collaborate with me in some way, I'm like wicked open to working with other people. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully I answered what a day in the life is of a GRC analyst. If I didn't, ask the question like, hey, what does an auditor actually do? Because you just said a bunch of stuff that wasn't that. Let me know. I'll be happy to answer it. Yeah, so that's the talk. So Q&A, if anyone has any questions, please, I'd love to talk about this more. Thanks, Matt.
Are you developing your own security awareness training product at all, or maybe some kind of open source? Or?
So the question was, am I developing any type of information security awareness training or modules or products or stuff like that? It's actually a great question. Thank you. So I talked about Intel being super important. I'm so committed to the importance of daily threat intelligence and understanding what is going on that literally every single morning, every weekday morning, I actually do a threat briefing live, like anyone in the world can attend it, where I cover the top 6 or 7 news stories of the day. And then I give like basically it's like 30 seconds of the story, like here's the news report. And then I give you about a 5-minute impact statement on how, like what can you actually do with this information at your organization, whether it's delivering a message to Carl or whether it's how you can shape this into a budget request to management. And then moving on to the next one. And there's actually right now, there's a couple hundred people who show up every single morning at 8 a.m. And again, if you do it regularly, you start being very aware of what is actually going on at macro level and being able to operationalize it to reduce risk at your organization. And that's absolutely free. Like, I love helping people and talking about cybersecurity. So, yeah. Yes?
So as far as GRC goes, get into that, materials, things to help prepare for that?
Oh, yeah. So the question was, if someone wanted to get into GRC, what materials, where might they start? So I'll tell you this. For folks who are looking to break into the industry, or maybe you're burned out at your current role, GRC is like of all the roles in our industry, I actually believe that GRC is I don't want to say the easiest, but the most frictionless entry into our industry. It's the lowest requirement for technical acumen. There's a lot of jobs because audit jobs are absolutely required. And by the way, I should have mentioned this in my audit slide. Thank you for asking. This is a fact, okay? Professional services companies make huge money off the US government, okay? Booz Allen, Deloitte, PwC, Accenture, Gemini, SAIC, there's a million of them, okay? They make huge money off the US government because the US government requires FISMA compliance and will require CMMC compliance in a minute, right? Well, these large firms open recs for audit jobs. Remember, I said the audit jobs are grind jobs, right? They're not super hard, but they take a lot of time and a lot of focus and a lot of energy. And what they will do is they'll hire someone like a junior analyst, right? Hey, I'm gonna send you to wherever, Pensacola, Florida. I'm gonna send you to Pensacola, Florida. And you're gonna be there a week, you're gonna interview these people, come back with your findings, yada, 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 right? And they'll pay you 1x, right? So they pay you $100,000, right? They're charging the government $200,000. And that's exactly how it works. So those professional services companies are hyper incentivized to fill those positions as much as they can because it's literally just money. If they can't fill that position, they're making $0. They fill the position, they're making $100K. They will not fill the position if they're not making money off you, right? And it's symbiotic, right? You break it into the industry, you're getting experience, you're learning skills. Those companies actually do have good professional development programs typically. So you're getting, education, you get sent to conferences, stuff like that. So I think audit is a fantastic way to get in and really get paid and do all those other things. And fun fact, I got sent to Antarctica. I went to the South Pole working for Booz Allen doing audit work. right? So you can go to some pretty cool places. It's not just Crane, Indiana, right? Also, well, and to that point, so I don't know if you asked because of this, I also wrote a book called the GRC Analyst I forget what I call it. What's the, yeah, Cybersecurity Career Master Plan. I forgot about that. And then I actually have a course that you can get. It's like $30 called the GRC Analyst Masterclass, which is basically this talk, except over 8 hours, and there's labs in it. So you can I can show you how to make more compelling awareness training and how to write a policy, how to do a risk assessment, all that stuff. But if you go to the Simply Cyber stuff, that's it's like a slip and slide. You just run and dive and just go on in. It's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun. Obviously, I love this stuff. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Or would you maybe take another approach like a cybersecurity framework?
If you're working at the organization already? Okay. So the question was, if your organization has some level of requirement for compliance to some standard, should you look into that? Absolutely. So if you work at a business, and let's assume you don't work in information security, right? Let's say you work in, I don't know, sales, right? And you want to go work in information security. That's a really great opportunity. You could say, okay, hey, I'm getting smart in whatever this standard is, right? Let's say CMMC for the sake of this discussion. You're a manufacturing company, you work in sales, you have a DoD client, you're about to become CMMC, required to comply with CMMC. You start getting smart on that. I will tell you this is another fact that is axiomatically true. Nothing is going to dispute this, okay? Information security offices are always understaffed. They're always looking for help. So if someone's like, hey, I'm willing to learn the CMMC and help you guys manage your compliance to something like that, I'll do it in my extra time, or in between sales calls, I've got extra cycles, I can do this. The information security office is going to be like, yes, absolutely. And then, by the way, when I get funding for a new position, this is another unknown about getting a job in the industry. 50% of jobs are not even ever published because you have already been doing CMMC work for me. Come on in. You've obviously showed initiative, motivation, and interest in learning and helping me solve my problems. So get in here. I've got an extra desk. You know what I mean? So absolutely worth looking into. I would encourage you to speak to, do a little bit of your own research on whatever compliance standard you have to comply with, and then have a conversation with either whoever is in charge of InfoSec at your office. So if it's director of IT, or if you actually have an information security officer or something like that, talk to them about what you have read and what your interests are, and how, and the key is to be how can I help you, InfoSec officer, solve your problems? Not what can you do for me, right? It's always got to be you contributing to them. And then naturally there'll be a reciprocation. Yeah, absolutely. Good question. And one other thing I should have mentioned, I'm sorry, but I think it's entirely super important. When I mentioned GRC, another big picture macro element of GRC is for the GRC business to look at the current state of the information security of the organization, a baseline assessment. No judgment, no one gets fired, no one's wrong. What are we doing? What's it look like? Cool. Where do we need to be based on our company size, the industry we work in, threat landscape, all this stuff? Okay, we have a base start state and we have a target state. And now GRC, their job, this is really the CISO's job, is to map how do you get from there to here. And this is where things like frameworks, like NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or ISO 27001 if you want to work in the European space, or CIS 18 if you have a simpler program, whatever it is, these frameworks are scaffolding that allow you to not have to think for yourself and say oh my God, how do I build a program? It's scaffolding. You put it in place. CIS, they're incrementally numbered on order of importance. So you start at 1 and you work your way to 18, right? Now, you don't just get 1 fully done and then move on to 2. You do it on a gradient. But the point is, that's GRC's job. And that's why when you have 3-year programs and stuff like that, it's because you're executing on a plan to achieve a target state. And then you break it down into tactical items, and that's how you start getting funding. Here's our plan. Executives, do you like the plan? We love the plan. We love being secure. Okay, the plan costs $800,000. You still love the plan? we love $400,000 worth of a plan. Okay, well, let me show you where you're gonna be exposed, right? Like, these are the concessions you have to make. Again, slightly beyond this talk, but as a CISO, my job is to advise the business. It is not to own the risk. It is to advise the business on the risk. They want to give me $400,000 instead of $800,000. That's fine. But here are the trade-offs that you are making. And you have to be able to communicate that. And that actually comes out of the risk work that the analyst does, right? You have your prioritization of risks, and you have 1 through 50. And they're only going to fund 1 through 20. Okay, well then I'm going to be a good doobie and do 21 through 50 and show you what that actual risk exposure looks like, what the likelihood of that exposure is, and what the impact could be. You know, it's up to you, like CEO, CFO. Like, I'm just here to explain, clearly communicate to you what you're deciding to do, right? Because when people talk about risk appetite, if you've ever heard that term, like, oh, what's your risk appetite? That's such a nebulous concept that no one's going to give you an answer to. It's much more, how much are you willing to spend on this risk reduction? And again, as our job as GRC people, it's to find the most value for the least amount of money to reduce the highest risks to the business so they can continue to make money, which is ultimately the goal of all businesses. Thank you. Any questions from Discord?
No, not that I saw.
Yeah, they're probably still recovering from, like, they're being blown back from the computer from all the knowledge bombs I dropped. Anybody else in I don't want to say chat. Anybody else in the audience? Awesome. We're right on time. Thank you so much for being here today. I genuinely appreciate it.